Hi there, I'm Donnelly from RotoBaller, and officially we are on to week number 8 of the 2023 NFL season. And we've had some surprises along the way, but you know what? Every week you can count on firing in Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert into those fantasy football lineups. You know what? Throw in Lamar Jackson while we're at it again. He's back in my good graces, back into that circle of trust. But before we go into this week's must-start, must-sit players at the quarterback position, I've got those public service announcements like one, remember, plenty can happen between now and Sunday's kickoff. I record this video here on Monday, so make sure you're paying attention to the injury reports. And the best way to do that is head over to the RotoBaller Discord channel, where we have experts there pretty much 24/7 to help you out with those fantasy needs. Second, this week is much better than last week. We've got no teams on buys, but we do have some injuries that we need to consider here. Last week, we watched the return of Deshaun Watson, which lasted about 15-20 minutes there before he exited with a head injury. Not a concussion, and he was basically cleared to return. However, head coach Kevin Stefanski there, he basically decided that I'm going to roll with TJ Walker. We also need to monitor the situations there in New York and Chicago when it comes to Daniel Jones' neck and Justin Fields' thumb. On Monday, Bears coach Matt Eberflus said that Fields was already going to be doubtful for Sunday Night Football's contest. Tyrod Taylor has managed to get the Giants involved more so in the passing game, and Tyson Bagent there, he got a win for the Bears against the Raiders in his rookie debut. Now, speaking of the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo appears to be on track to play Monday Night Football against the Detroit Lions. Thank you to the fantasy gods, because I do not think we could handle watching Brian Hoyer go out there another week. Another quarterback that maybe the injury is probably better than not is the one that sustained to Ryan Tannehill. That ankle injury back in week number 6. It looks like he's going to be doubtful for the Titans game this week, which means we might have Malik Willis under center for week number 8. So for week number 8, here are my must-start and must-sit players at the quarterback position, starting with start your studs. Anyone I mentioned earlier on, those 5-6 players, you're starting them each and every week. It's as simple as that. Great matchups to be had all the way across the board. But I'm thinking, you know what? Jalen Hurts, he's got Washington. Patrick Mahomes, he's got Denver. Justin Fields, if he were to play, has Los Angeles. While Justin Herbert has the Chicago Bears. All those are amongst the 4 friendliest defenses against opposing quarterbacks this season. Even Lamar Jackson faces a top 10 favorable matchup in the Arizona Cardinals. So again, basically start your studs and feel good about it without having to dig too deep. But if you have to dig deep, why don't you just scratch the surface here with Kenny Pickett this week going against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yes, you can land a guy here off the waivers that's going to potentially be offering you top 10 fantasy production. Pickett, he wasn't spectacular, but he did get Deontay Johnson back last week, and he has been getting this offense going a little bit better. Heck, even Najee Harris and Jalen Warren managed to score touchdowns. This week, the Steelers face a Jaguars team that is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the quarterback position this year, on a per-game basis, that is. Now, Jacksonville, they've allowed the 9th most passing touchdowns, tied with Miami, and the 2nd most passing yards this season, trailing only those Los Angeles Chargers. So you should feel pretty good about Kenny Pickett. I mean, there are worse options out there. Brian Hoyer. Now, another quarterback that I feel good about starting this week, I probably say this more often than I probably should, but I'm going back to Jordan Love this week versus the Minnesota Vikings. I just can't seem to quit Jordan Love. Just when I think I am done with him, another juicy matchup presents itself. Minnesota, they sit inside the top 10 as far as allowing fantasy points on a per-game basis to opposing quarterbacks this season. And Love, he did manage to throw that ball in double coverage last week with about 1:44 left on the clock when he had an easy check down for A.J. Dillon there. But you know what? That's a rookie mistake. This is really his first year of operating this offense. He's got young wide receivers, so I'm willing to cut him a little bit of break. Now, when I did look back on the film, even his touchdown pass to Romeo Doubs wasn't a great throw. In fact, he probably underthrew that and probably should have thrown that to the back corner of the end zone. But you know what? I digress when it comes to that as well, because the Vikings, they have allowed 8 passing touchdowns against the season. They only got 3 interceptions to date. So that's telling me those windows against the Vikings are a little bit bigger than maybe some of the other contests in which Jordan Love has played. Now, regardless of how you feel about Love or how you feel how poorly he played against the Denver Broncos, he still had a top 10 fantasy week when it comes to the quarterback position, and you should feel pretty good about that. Now, another quarterback that I'm starting this week, if he's healthy, now that's a disclaimer right there, is Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Detroit Lions. Yes, this is my sleeper play of the week, Jimmy Garoppolo, because this Lions, they haven't been very good when it comes to opposing quarterbacks. They're allowing 17.96 fantasy points per game to the position. And we just watched Lamar Jackson, yes, that Lamar Jackson, throw for 357 yards and 3 touchdowns against this Lions secondary. With pass catchers like Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, you have to believe that Garoppolo's floor in this contest is somewhere around 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, in that range. And you have to also factor in how difficult this Lions team is to run on. So there's going to be some dump-off passes to Josh Jacobs in there as well. Now, Garoppolo, he's far from perfect. In his numbers, it proves himself. But he's got a stud receiver there in Devontae Adams, who's becoming increasingly more frustrated in his role and losing. Now, I'm not here to say that the Raiders are going to win this game, but anything is better than what Brian Hoyer and that train wreck was watching it last week. Okay. You know what? Desperate times, they call for desperate measures. And well, Mac Jones, he's coming off a 25 of 30 performance for 272 yards against the Buffalo Bills in a New England Patriots victory. And considering that he faces a Dolphins team that has allowed the 8th most passing yards and the 9th most passing touchdowns this season, maybe Mac Jones is what you need this week. Now, some quarterbacks that I'm avoiding or fading, and it starts with Matthew Stafford against the Dallas Cowboys. It never hurts when you have 2 stud receivers that seem to be open on every single play, as Stafford has with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. But this week, Stafford faces a Dallas Cowboys defense that ranks 5th in fantasy points allowed against the position, allowing just 13.04 fantasy points per game, and they have picked off their opposition as many times as they have allowed touchdown passes. Now, I went back and I watched that Rams game from last week, and it appears that Stafford is less than 100% himself, judging by the way a few of those passes sailed over his intended targets. With DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons on the attack this week, Stafford could ill afford to come into this game anything less than 100%. Another quarterback that's probably on the mend right now is Joe Burrow, but he's got the San Francisco 49ers this week, one of the top defenses in the league when it comes to limiting opposing quarterbacks, allowing less than 10 fantasy points per game to the position. Now, the bye week came at just the perfect time for Burrow and the Bengals, as Burrow has been dealing with that calf injury much of the season, but at Monday's practice, he appeared to be moving pretty well, which is great considering that he's going to need to be able to move to avoid pressure courtesy of Nick Bosa in this contest. Last season, San Francisco sacked the quarterback 44 times. They are currently on pace to do such 42.5 times, but they're also on pace to have 28 interceptions after posting just 20 a season ago. So Burrow and company, they're going to have their work cut out for them. Another sit this week is Geno Smith versus the Cleveland Browns. Minshew Mania, it ran wild on this Cleveland Browns defense last week, dropping the Browns from the top defensive unit against the quarterback position all the way down to 7th. The Browns, they had all the answers when it came to the 49ers offense, and yet they could not contain Minshew as he threw for 305 yards and a pair of scores. That said, the Seahawks, they aren't the 49ers, so you know that the Browns will be looking to prove that last week's performance was just a mere blip on their defensive dominance. Even in a game in which the Browns gave up 38 points, they still had an interception, they still had 4 forced fumbles, they had 3 fumble recoveries, and they had 4 sacks. So even in a bad game, the Browns are pretty good. Once again, here's your quarterback starts and sits blitz for week number 8. Start your studs. They all have great matchups this week. And if you don't have a stud, grab Kenny Pickett, who faces the 4th friendliest fantasy defense. Jordan Love against the Vikings is another start. Even though he had a bad week, he was still a top 10 fantasy quarterback. They don't ask how, they ask how many. And Jimmy Garoppolo, should he play, faces a Lions secondary that is allowing nearly 18 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Now, I am sitting Matthew Stafford versus the Cowboys. Stafford, you look to have a bit of a hitch in his step, and Dallas, they are tough on quarterbacks. Joe Burrow versus Nick Bosa and the 49ers. San Francisco leads the NFL in interceptions and has more picks than touchdowns allowed. And sit Geno Smith versus the Cleveland Browns. They have the top-ranked defense ready to go this week after Minshew Mania ran wild on them. Speaking of running wild, run wild here on the RotoBaller YouTube channel for plenty more fantasy football analysis.